So my name is Father Jason Covarrubias. We are here at the beautiful chapel of St. John Chrysostom at St. Andrew Parish in Riverside, California. I am the assistant pastor here to Father Josiah. I'm the second assistant to him. There's also another assistant, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
Father, how did you discover the Orthodox Church? Have you always been Orthodox?
That's a good question. No, I have not always been Orthodox. I was raised Roman Catholic, and I became Orthodox in my young adult years. I believe I was 27 when I was received into the church, which was a few years ago, many years ago now. And I became Orthodox as a result of some exposure that I had to a tradition which I didn't know of before. What exposed me to Orthodoxy was, first and foremost, without me knowing it, the tradition of the holy icons, For many years before becoming Orthodox, I labored as a Roman Catholic youth minister in a local parish here. And while working there as youth minister, it was a full-time ministry. At the office that we had there, the pastor, the parish priest there, who was very close to me at the time, God rest his soul, he had beautiful icons throughout the office, beautiful icons that were actually depicted by a Roman Catholic iconographer. Regardless, they were very nice and depicted in a Byzantine tradition, and I always appreciated them. I didn't know much about them. I took them for granted, thinking that they were just like any other religious imagery that we had around. But they always beckoned me every time I would walk down the hall and go to my office. Every time I'd go out to the waiting room, I'd see the beautiful icons, and I always wondered, what are these? Where do these come from? What do they mean? So that was my first initial exposure, though I didn't really know that it was. But it wasn't until later that he himself mentioned the Orthodox Church, and I questioned, what is that? What does that mean? What does that mean? So that's my initial exposure to what Orthodoxy was.
What compelled you to want to leave the tradition that you grew up in and pursue the Orthodox faith?
That's a complicated question, and for many it raises some questions, so I have to tread carefully. So I love the Lord, not as much as I ought to, and I need to repent of not loving him as much as I should. But I always loved the Lord. I had the desire to follow him and be close to him and to serve him. And that's why I had at the time the position of youth minister. I wanted to take the abilities that God gave me to serve his young people, and at the time that was a ministry that was opened up to me, and I, as a practicing Roman Catholic at the time, I served in that capacity. And I always felt a call to something greater than that. I wanted to serve the Lord in a greater capacity. But it was a big thing that I wrestled with. It's very different in Roman Catholicism when you discern for serving the Lord. And Roman Catholicism, at least in the experience that I had, I understand fully well that it's different across different dioceses, different states, different countries. I get that. But at the time when I was serving, the big push in the diocese that I was in was to ask everyone, all young men, and even people who, for instance, to ask women if they had ever considered to enter into the tonsured life, into the monastic life, into the religious life was more of the Catholic verbiage that would be used, the religious life. And so that was something that was really pressed upon young people, and it was pressed upon me, and I really had the desire to serve the Lord in that capacity, not in the religious life per se as a monastic, but in some capacity serving the Lord in tending to his lambs. And so working as a youth minister, I began to grow in my love and devotion to the Lord, and I was learning more about the church and more about the faith. And then in my struggle to find out what that meant, I was led to believe that perhaps God was calling me, as we would say, to serve him in the vocation as a minister, as a priest. And for a long time, I did struggle with the idea of serving as a celibate priest, which would be demanded of in the Roman tradition. And I contemplated that, and I thought, okay, this is the only option. If you want to serve the Lord in his church, which I fully believed at the time that the Roman Church was his church, this is the way to do it. You must embrace the celibate life. This is the way to do it. But I always struggled with that because I did not feel a call to sacrifice that part of my life. I knew why people do it, and I knew that some people were able to give that part of their life up as a radical offering to the Lord, and I really wanted to, but I also didn't feel that call to do so. And this is where it gets complicated, because many people say, well, there it is. That's why he became Orthodox. How convenient. How convenient. I do want to clarify that it wasn't a matter of convenience for me, right? If it would have been a matter of convenience, oh, he just became Orthodox because he can become a priest and be married and become a priest. If it was a matter of convenience, becoming Orthodox was not easy for me. It was not easy. Leaving the Roman Catholic Church was not something I took lightly. It took me many years to leave the Roman Church. I was convinced. I was afraid to leave the Roman Church. I mean, I would weep at times. I was very serious about my Catholic faith. And so it wasn't anything that I took lightly. And by God's providence, it was my godfather of confirmation, who was the priest that I worked for. He, in a joking manner, as he saw that I was struggling with this and I would confide in him this inner struggle, working for him as a youth minister, sharing with him my love and desire to serve the Lord, he jokingly said, but also not jokingly, he said, well, then you should look at the Orthodox Church. And I had never heard of that before. I had never heard of that. What do you mean, the Orthodox Church? What does that mean? Mind you, I was a Mexican-American, first-generation Californian. I grew up, my first language is Spanish. That's my first language. I spoke Spanish for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, period. Everything was in Spanish. Sorry, this is a slight digression. When I went to school, it was the most bizarre experience, because all of a sudden I'm encountering children my age that I could not understand, and adults, my teachers, that I was so confused. All my life, being the son of immigrants and friends with other immigrants, everything was in Spanish. TV was in Spanish. Radio was in Spanish. Sometimes there would be an English show, apparently, but I would never pay attention to that. I was too young. The point is that my world revolved around being a first-generation Californian, son of immigrants, Mexican-American, Roman Catholic. And when I took ownership of my faith, I was baptized Roman Catholic as a child. I grew up Catholic. I did it as a child as much as I could. You kind of neglect it when most people do when they're teenagers. And then when I became, after high school, I really took ownership of it, and I really delved deeply into my faith and really practiced it. All this to say that I had no desire in seeking something else. Why would I do that? And so to those who might say that, oh, well, this was a matter of convenience, it was not convenient at all. And if it would have been a matter of convenience, if convenience is what I was seeking, I would have started my own church. I would have left the Roman tradition and started my own church. But I recognize the complete foolishness and evil, if I can use that word, the evil in that, the heresy that would be. So when this man in my life mentioned this, and he is the first one, he bought me a book. We went to, of all places, a church supply store, Ave Maria, up north, and he was buying church supplies that we needed. He bought some vestments and the Paschal candle that we needed for that year. And we were getting all kinds of stuff. And he's the one who showed me a couple of books. He pulled them out of the shelf. He said, look, this is the Orthodox way, and this is the Orthodox Church. And he had a book by Metropolitan Kallistos Ware, Father John Meyendorf, I think it was Father Alexander Schmemann at the time. And he showed me. He pulled them out and he showed me. And I remember I looked at them and I thought, I need to get these. And jokingly too, I just kind of like looked at him and threw him into the pile with the stuff. Forgive me. I threw him into the pile and I said, oh, can we get those too? We need those too. And he just looked at me and he says, yeah, we can get those too. And I'll never forget. I was reading these all this entire time we were up there. I had gone to help him to perform a funeral for a member of his family. And on our way down, that's all I did was just read. This was up north in Northern California. And I was exposed to things that were blowing my mind. And I had to confirm this. I thought these people are crazy. This can't be true. This is weird. And I would ask him questions and he would say, oh yeah, no, that's true. That's true. That's correct. And I thought, well, how come I haven't heard of this? Where have I been? And then I started looking at the time. I needed to verify. So then I went and looked, and I remember reading the encyclicals by, at the time, Pope John Paul II. And I thought, oh my goodness, especially his Orientale Lumen, the two lungs of the church, which is a Roman Catholic belief. But that helped me on my journey to Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy does not embrace that belief, by the way, the two lungs of the church and Christ being the heart. But that helped me to discern. And then I started looking into the teachings of the church, and then I started looking into the history, and I thought, oh my gosh. And for a time, that was rather depressing because I thought, what am I going to do now? I almost had wished that I never had discovered that, because now I was faced with a decision as to, well, I thought there was no questioning the fact that this is the mother and head church, that Rome is it. And now here is this complete hemisphere, the eastern part of the world that I had never been exposed to, that has this beautiful, at that time I didn't know, this beautiful tradition, with which, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church officially, has valid priesthood, valid sacraments, valid teachings, valid everything. Then if they're so valid, why aren't we together? And I started looking at that and the reasons why there was a separation, and that's when I really started to think to myself, I can't continue this way. I will be leading a life that will be a lie. And all that was coupled with the reality that I had this strange desire for something I had never experienced before. I wanted to pray in a way that I couldn't even articulate. I remember, and I know some people, when I talked about this in Spanish, some people got upset. Well, I'm talking about my experience I remember I set up like this little prayer altar at home and wanting to chant. What was that? I had never been taught that in my Catholic faith. Never in catechism did they ever talk about that. They never talked about setting up a prayer corner or a prayer altar. I understand that some people have prayer altars, un santuario en la casa at their home. I get it. But this wasn't a thing. It wasn't really a thing that all families did. It wasn't where you went to every single Catholic home and there's the prayer corner, there's the prayer altar. I know some people do. In Orthodoxy, everyone has a prayer altar at home. If it's, whether it's small and humble or whether it's very prestigious and big and beautiful or all the way in between. I mean, everyone has the beautiful corner in their home, the beautiful place, the prayer corner, the prayer altar. Anyway, so I was setting these things up, not even knowing. This is before even this whole Orthodoxy episode, searching this. I had wanted this tradition that I longed for that I just couldn't find. It wasn't in the Mexican Catholic tradition. It wasn't there. I mean, when do we use chant in the Mexican church? We're using, for goodness sake, forgive me, I say this with all respect, but I remember being in Mass in Espanol, en la misa, and listening to El Padre Nuestro, the Our Father, to the melody of Simon and Garfunkel's Sound of Silence. This was how we were praying the Our Father, and I thought, this is weird. Anyway, I digress. The point being that longing for something of substance, longing for something deeper, going to adoration of the Blessed Sacrament at the time as a Roman Catholic with youth, that was my job, and just thinking there has to be something more dignified than this. Let alone that the adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, this is going to be controversial for many. Adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, as especially now as an Orthodox, that's not something that we ought to do. Forgive me. It's not something we ought to do. It's controversial. It's our Lord said, "Take this. This is my body. Eat that." He said we have to eat it. He commanded us to eat it and commanded us to drink His blood, not to worship it and to keep it out for our worship of the Blessed Sacrament. But that's beside the point. But being at these places where you're in the presence of the Eucharist as a Roman Catholic, and the kids are jumping, and there's a rock band, full-on rock band, loud, I would really struggle with that. I really struggled immensely, because I would sit there with the youth and I would try to pray in front of the Holy Mystery at the time. This is as a Roman Catholic. Things have changed for me now in my understanding of all of that, just to be clear. But I thought this can't be proper to pray this way, like this, in the temple. Anyway, all of these things culminated to the point where I started to think I need to explore this myself, and I started to look into this. I think for me, one of the things that finally, well, there's many other things, finally broke the camel's back, as they say. As youth minister, I was invited to go to, not invited, I was commanded to go to take the youth of our parish to Catholic Youth Day, where there would be thousands of youth. And the youth day that I had gone to, which was a local youth day that we do here, this wasn't World Youth Day, but it was a local big youth day. We had an arena with 5,000 teenagers, all Catholic teenagers. And the Mass was down where the arena was. And they had a big orchestra with violins and strings and drums, and they had a rock band together that was playing with them. And when it came time for communion, the communion hymn at the time, let alone with the fact that they're giving the Eucharist to teenagers coming up with their backwards hats and just taking, the Roman Church refers to them as extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion for extraordinary circumstances. In the Orthodox Church, there is no minister of Holy Communion but the priest and a deacon who has a blessing from the bishop to do that, to administer communion. Anyway, when it came time to partake of the Eucharist, and the communion hymn was a song from the band, I think it was a popular band at the time, Evanescence, I think that they were called. It was My Sacrifice or something like that. And there were these two young people with these microphones, like these whatever, and they're performing and they're screaming off the top of their lungs, "Save me!" really like loud. And I'm thinking and the orchestra, it was just, at that point I thought, how sad. I can't remember if I actually went up to receive that day, but I thought, the bishop who organized this knew that there was going to be 5,000 teenagers present here. Why wouldn't the bishop, to put on an event like this, and who the person was, I'm not going to say names, the bishop had the financial ability to go to Rome or go to the Alps or go somewhere and find monks or nuns to bring and say, look, we're going to have a mass and there's going to be 5,000 people there. And we want to remind these teens who they are, where they come from, what the holy Christian tradition is. We want this to be a deifying event. We want this to be a sanctified, glorious event. Please come. We'll pay you whatever. We'll house you. No, this is what they did. And I came back from that experience and I told my boss at the time, God rest his soul, the same priest I'm talking to you about, I said, "Forgive me, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that next year." He wasn't very happy about that, but he asked me why, and I explained it, and he said, "Fair enough, I'll get someone else to do that part." And then I wrestled again for many years after that. Can I do this? Can I do this? My first ever divine liturgy that I went to is a Greek Orthodox church, a local Greek Orthodox church. It was a thing. It was a thing. I went with a group of friends, and it was a lot of fun just to go there. We were exploring, and it was beautiful, extremely foreign to me. And I remember thinking I hear it in my mind, and this is exactly what I said. I was a young adult, so forgive I just said, "This is cool, but not for me." I said that after my first divine liturgy. I mean, look at me now, But I thought that's exactly how I said it. I can still hear myself saying it as a young adult. This is cool, but not for me. I couldn't do this every week. I didn't understand what they were talking about. I was excited to see the holy iconography. At that time, I had learned more about what iconography was. The priest was really nice. The priest actually at the time, it was embarrassing for us, but he told his congregation, he said, "I want to welcome the guests." And he said, the guests were here at the beginning of Orthros. Nobody was here except for the guests and the chanter. He says, "All you guys came after communion. What's going on?" And we were kind of like, anyway. That was an interesting experience there for us. But that's a little bit about my exposure and what compelled me, this desire to serve. And then from that, the impetus later became, if there is this other body that's claiming to be the church, and our church at the time when I was Catholic agrees that they have everything valid. Once I looked into that, I read some of the Holy Fathers and looked at the history of the church, looked at the development of the papacy, the development of all the belief that Rome is the mother and head of the church. Why is that the case? I later on was driven to the point of saying, I need to pursue this. But I still struggled. For me, the scariest thing was to leave the Pope of Rome. That scared me. I really struggled psychologically and spiritually with that. I really was afraid. And after things started to get a little serious, the priest, my godfather, told me, "Remember, if you're not with the Supreme Pontiff, you're not with the true church." And I thought, then why in the world did you even tell me about any of this? And he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. He said, "Remember that." And I remember, of all people, I was sharing these frustrations with a Byzantine Catholic monk, of all people, a monk. And it was in Spanish. He spoke Spanish. And I was so frustrated. And I said, "I just don't know what to do. I'm so scared. And I don't know, the papacy, it's just this papacy thing. I really want to do this, but if I leave." And he looked at me, put his hand on me, and he said, I'll never forget. He said, "Brother, what has the Pope done for you?" And I thought, what? "What do you care about the Pope?" He said, "What do you care about the Pope? Does he know you? What has he done for you?" And I said, "Why are you saying this?" He says, "You need to look at this. Clearly you found something. Look at the history, follow your conscience, and listen to God." And I said, "Okay." I think he said this because, he's Byzantine Catholic. Maybe it was easier for him to say that. I can't imagine any Roman Catholic saying this. And sure enough, I went even further and finally decided, okay, I have to do this. I can't in good conscience ignore this because I believe this now. And I would just stay here because I'm attached to what I had always known, even though I don't believe it fully anymore. And so I decided that I needed to do this, and I began my journey I was going to a Greek church at the time, and going there, the priest told me, I'll never forget too, he said in his very thick Greek accent, he says, "You want to become Orthodox? First, go to holy monastery. You stay 1 week, holy monastery, experience Orthodox in fullness, come back, and if you still want to be Orthodox, talk to me." So I said, my accent went from like Greek to something else there. But anyway, I went to the monastery of St. Anthony's in Arizona, and I stayed there for a week. And then I decided, that's where I learned, yes, this is where I have to be. And that was an interesting thing in itself, because at the monastery, while I'm trying to discern what I'm going to do, I saw this interesting dynamic at play. Here I was trying to leave a tradition that, in my estimation, in my experience, I know everyone has different experiences, but in my experience, it was a tradition that was competing to see who could be more progressive in the Roman Catholic tradition. I remember even receiving a compliment from a deacon in LA. I was helping at a funeral of a friend's father, and the deacon who was there presiding over it learned from where I was from, and he said, "Wow, I congratulate you for your bishop." At the time, regardless who he was, I congratulate, he's a very progressive man. And I thought, that's so interesting. And I just kept seeing this competition or striving for progressiveness. At the monastery, while I was discerning for orthodoxy, I saw this other kind of competition that kind of scared me. A competition for who can be the most orthodox. And I remember talking to people there, other pilgrims, and you have to be careful with other people. You know, if someone doesn't have a blessing to speak, or, you know, if they're just another layperson, you have to be very careful. And these people, I would hear them speak. "Oh, don't go to that priest. He's not Orthodox. Oh, don't go to that one. He's not." And I was thinking, what do you mean? He's an Orthodox priest. No. He's not Orthodox. You need to go to this one. He's more Orthodox. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then I thought, what am I getting into? I'm leaving this tradition that's competing to see who can be most progressive, and I'm going to go to this tradition that's going to compete to see who can be most Orthodox. And then people are fighting. Thank God I had an opportunity to meet with, at the time, Elder Ephraim of Arizona. And I met with him through a translator. And it was a beautiful experience. I had learned a little bit about who he was. And when I encountered him, I could really experience who he was. That's the only way I could put it. He was very small. He was a very small man. And as soon as I came into the room and sat down in front of him, like we're sitting right now, just to be in his presence and look at him, he looked at me and he smiled with this most sincere and tender smile. And he gave me a blessing. And as soon as I just was in front of him, I don't know what came over me. Like I could feel God's love through him, God's presence somehow. I didn't know what to make of it at the time. But it was so beautiful. I was just moved to tears. I couldn't explain it. And I kept asking myself, what is going on? What is this? And I tried to compose myself. I mean, I wasn't a complete mess, but I was just so touched. And I asked him the silly question of that experience. I said, first of all, I'm very concerned. I'm going to become Orthodox. This is why I'm here. And I'm deciding that I want to do this, but I have some concerns. First of all, my family is not Orthodox. They're Catholic. What is that going to mean? Second of all, I've made this observation. The competition for progressiveness and Catholicism, and the competition for, rigidity or whatever in Orthodoxy. And he laughed. And he smiled. And I said, what do I do, Holy Father? What do I do? And in his very tender voice, almost like with a giggle, he said, and I'll never forget, he said, Orthodoxy, he said, Orthodoxy, Holy Orthodoxy is the religion of love. He says, that's all you have to know. This is the true faith. And it is the religion of love because it follows God who is love. It follows our Lord Jesus Christ. He says, regarding your family, don't worry. He said, you can pray with them, because many people were saying, if you become Orthodox, you'll never be able to pray with your family again. He said, you can pray with them. You lead the prayers. You teach them how to pray. You pray with them. He says, of course, they're your family. They're your family. He says, but your love for them must be transformed from an emotional love to a heavenly love. You have to transform your love for them. And they, in due time, they will respond properly to that if you live your life correctly. And then he said, and about this other thing, he says, don't waste your time with that. Don't be concerned with that. Orthodoxy is life. Orthodoxy is love. Just follow the Lord. And that brought me so much peace. And I'm probably not articulating it verbatim to what he said. That's the best to my ability. This was many years ago. And that solidified it for me that I needed to do this. I went back to the priest and started my journey. But the other part of my journey was now my girlfriend at the time, who had been helping me with ministry in the Roman Catholic Church. And I got to the point where we had started even talking, and I said, when we started talking, I said, look, I'm going to become Orthodox, and the woman I marry will be Orthodox. Do you understand that? Do you have any questions? And she just looked at me, and she said, yeah, I understand. I said, do you have any questions? And she goes, yeah, just one. I go, what? She goes, what's Orthodox? And so I took her to the church we were going to. It was the shrine in Covina, St. Nectario's shrine in Covina. And I remember being there, and I remember being such an idiot and doing stupid things when we prayed at home. When we would spend time together. She lived with her parents, I lived with my parents, the typical Mexican thing to do, until you get married. Some people wonder, why do you stay there? You're a young adult, you should have your own place. In the tradition I was brought up, you stay with your parents till you're married. Then you are, you're released and you go. You don't typically move out. It's like almost like an abandonment if you move out at 18. At least in the Mexican culture that I was brought up in, you stay with your parents, and then when you're ready to establish your own home with a wife, you move out. And you marry and you move out with her, right? Okay. So when we would get together, though, to spend time together and we would pray, I would tell her things like, no, it's in tone 1. You have to chant it in tone 1. And she would look at me like, I'm not going to chant this. I don't know how to sing. And I'm like, no, let me show you. And she said, no. She would take the prayer book and say, leave me alone. I don't even want to pray with you anymore. This is weird. You're having me look at... That was the stupidest thing I could have done. And I was actually harming her journey to Orthodoxy. I was actually pushing her away without me knowing it. So I went to the priest at the time that I was there, and I told him the whole story. Father, this and that, and she wanted... And I'll never forget again, he was sitting on my right. And he goes, really fast. No. Ochi, which means no in Greek. Ochi, puts his hand on my knee. He says, you leave her alone. I said, okay. Don't push her. It's here. Don't push her. You push her, you push her away. Leave her alone. I said, and I started, but, shh. Ochi, no. Leave her alone. And every time I try to say something, shh. Okay. So I backed off completely. And it started to do exactly what he said. But it was still hard. Back to our matter of convenience. This was not a convenient thing. No fue cosa de conveniencia. This was not convenient. Because we were driving very far to go to this church. And on top of that, it was like 95% Greek. Beautiful, but Greek. And sometimes we would just look at each other and think, what are we doing here? It was very challenging. And one Sunday where she couldn't go, remember we weren't Orthodox at the time. We were going to Orthodox Church in the morning on Sundays, and then we were doing the youth mass at the Catholic Church on Sundays because we were helping there in the youth ministry. We had a program with about 300 youth. It was a big program. Well, small for Catholic numbers, but anyway, so I went there and I was thinking, this is very stressful. We have to drive so far, and then we get there and it's in Greek. At least, well, I guess at least I'll get a little bit of English. And that particular Sunday, I went there and there was a different chanter, and the liturgy was 100% in Greek. 100%. And I thought to myself, I can't do this. What am I doing? How am I going to raise kids in this? This is... Anyway, so I told my friends that I had there, and I told the priest, I said, Father, I don't know if I can do this. He was very encouraging. He said, don't worry, you're going to find an answer. And it was a man who was there who ended up becoming my godfather, because I almost was going to leave. I was just going to say, I want to do this, but this is just not happening. And other parishes I would visit, they were very heavily ethnic, and I thought, this is just not, it's not going to happen. And then this man told me, forgive. This is a thing that happens sometimes in the church. And I said, why was it today all Greek? Not even like sprinkles of English. He said, well, I forgot the name of the chanter. He says, so-and-so just went to Thessaloniki and he was trained and he's so excited. He wanted to not show off, but he wanted to use all the skills that he learned in all the songs, and he wanted to sing them, the hymns. And that's why he was so excited, And he introduced me to him. He knew English, but they were just so happy that, he went to Thessaloniki and the priest went along with it and it was all Greek. Okay. He says, please don't give up. God has a plan. God is going to work something out. And sure enough, shortly after that, on a Sunday, I was going with a friend to the same church and we were running late. And I said, you know what, we're running late. And he said, well, he lived here in this town. He said, why don't we go to the Orthodox Church down the street from where I live? And I'm thinking, there's an Orthodox Church closer? What are you talking about? He says, yeah, there's this one. I think it's Orthodox. I drive by it. It's by the school. And so we came here. We were very confused when we came because they had a sign that said, please make sure that you pay for the parking. And I was like, what? And we parked and we went up to the sign and I'm looking, and each spot had a number, and I thought, what an interesting church. They charge you to pay or to be here. That was something else, that sometimes some events from the university down the street would come here and utilize the parking. And I think it had become a thing that they were, anyway. I remember asking someone that was walking in, I said, brother, do we have to pay to park? And he just laughed. He grabbed me. He says, don't even look at that thing. We're taking that thing down. That's for the students that keep parking here. He says, come on in. So he took me in, and it was the parish of St. Andrew. And I remember coming here, and it was the complete opposite. It was like 90% English, 5% Arabic, 5% Greek, some other stuff sprinkled in there. And I thought, wow, this is phenomenal. So then I started to bring my wife, my girlfriend at the time, here. We got connected with the priest here, who continues to be the pastor here. And this is where we completed our catechesis. I reached out to the other priest. I got his blessing to come here. We became catechumens here from after being over there. And we were catechized here. We were baptized here. We were married here. Our children are baptized here. And by God's grace, here I am now serving as a priest after many years of learning what that even looks like in Holy Orthodoxy, which is completely different from anything that I had been exposed to in Roman Catholicism in the sense of pursuing any kind of vocation. In Orthodoxy, I've learned it's not the man who seeks it out. The man may have an interest and a desire. St. Nectario says that when he became ordained, all his dreams had come true. You can have a desire to serve the Lord, but it's the people who affirm that call. It's the people who, in the end, say axios. This is what I've learned, right? This is what has been taught to me, and this is what I've seen and what I've experienced. So it's not like pursuing any other type of vocation, and you don't just drop it in people's laps. Hey, you ever thought about being a priest? You don't do it that way. You just have people that are living the Christian life, if you have men that are living their life as proper priests and praying and leading the people, young men will be inspired to want to pursue that. And then they'll approach and the people will confirm if that's something that indeed God is calling them to.